Have you ever wondered why some of the smartest people you know still struggle with anxiety, indecision, overthinking, or emotional storms they can't control? Why do intelligent minds, capable of solving complex problems, fall into traps that pull them away from peace, success, and clarity? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Intelligence can become a double-edged sword. The same mind that can craft brilliant ideas can also build cages out of fear, doubt, and illusion. Today, we're going to expose 10 silent mental traps smart people fall into, and more importantly, how ancient Stoic wisdom can guide you out of them. And as you watch, pay attention closely, because one of these traps might be quietly destroying your confidence right now, without you even noticing. But we'll talk about that one later. For now, let's open the first loop. What if the very thing that makes you intelligent is making you miserable? Imagine a person standing at the edge of a cliff, surrounded by endless possibilities. Smart people see more options, more variables, more risks. Their minds spin faster. Suddenly, that cliff becomes terrifying. Instead of jumping toward opportunities, they freeze. This is the first mental trap: analysis paralysis. It's like having too many browser tabs open in your brain. The Stoics compared this to holding a sword that's too sharp. You hesitate, afraid to use it. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish." In other words, action beats thinking when thinking becomes overthinking. Think about how many dreams have died not because they were impossible, but because someone waited for the perfect moment. But we'll return to analysis paralysis later, and I'll show you a surprising technique Marcus Aurelius used to overcome it, one that will shift how you make decisions forever. But before you think you've escaped that trap, let's follow the second open loop. Smart people often assume they understand themselves. They think self-awareness is automatic. But actually, the more intelligent you are, the easier it is to construct sophisticated excuses. Picture a lawyer in your head, defending your weaknesses in court. Every mistake has a justification. Every flaw has an alibi. Smart people become experts in self-deception. Seneca warned us about this when he said, "Most powerful is he who has himself in his own power." If you don't look at your own patterns honestly, intelligence won't save you. It will hide the truth from you. Later in this video, we'll uncover a simple Stoic journaling exercise that acts like a mirror for your mind, revealing blind spots you didn't even know were there. But hold that thought, because the third trap silently feeds the first two: emotional overinvestment in thoughts. Smart minds don't just think, they feel their thoughts. Ideas become identities. Opinions become self-worth. A single negative mental scenario spirals into a narrative of doom. It's not intelligence that hurts you, it's attachment. The Stoics taught us that thoughts are events, not truths. Marcus Aurelius would literally tell himself, "It's just a thought. It's just noise." Imagine how much lighter life would feel if you could detach like that. And later, you'll learn a simple mental switch to do exactly that in real time. But don't get comfortable yet. There's a fourth trap, and this one is deadly because it disguises itself as humility. Smart people often underestimate themselves. Why? Because awareness magnifies imperfections. The more you know, the more you realize what you don't know. It's called the Dunning-Kruger curve. The Stoics would call it false modesty. You might be more capable than you believe, but your intelligence keeps reminding you of your flaws. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "You have power over your mind, not external events." Later, I'll share how you can break this perception loop and reclaim your confidence. Here's a final twist for now. Smart people also fall into the illusion of control. They think if they calculate enough, predict enough, prepare enough, they can eliminate uncertainty. But life doesn't work like that. The Stoics taught the most liberating truth: control is an illusion. We can only control our actions, not outcomes. And the irony? The moment you release control, clarity returns.
anxiety fades, strength grows. There are still 6 more mental traps lurking ahead, some far more dangerous and invisible than these. But we'll get there. For now, hold these ideas gently. Reflect. Because in the next paragraph, we're going to explore a trap that destroys relationships, careers, and mental peace, and almost nobody realizes they're falling into it. Smart minds are more susceptible than anyone, and escaping it requires a shift in perspective so powerful, it can change how you interact with people forever.
Have you ever noticed how the smartest people often feel misunderstood? It's not arrogance, it's something deeper. When your mind operates quickly, you start expecting others to connect the dots with you. But here's the trap: unspoken expectations, quiet assumptions, invisible standards. This mental trap silently poisons relationships, workplaces, friendships, even families. Smart people assume others should just know what they meant, how they feel, or why something matters. When those expectations aren't met, they spiral into disappointment or frustration. The Stoics warned that expectations are premeditated resentments. Seneca wrote that we suffer not from reality, but from the gap between reality and what we imagine it should be. And here's the open loop. Later, you'll learn a single sentence that dissolves this trap instantly, something used by high performers, leaders, and ancient philosophers alike. Imagine a brilliant software engineer named Farid. At work, he saw every mistake before it happened, but instead of communicating early, clearly, and patiently, he assumed his team should already understand the obvious problems. Weeks later, the project crashed. Not because the team was incompetent, but because Farid never aligned expectations. He thought being smart meant being silent. Stoicism says the opposite. Intelligence means clarity. Marcus Aurelius practiced what modern psychologists call preventative communication. Express the standard before the disappointment appears. Why assume when clarity creates peace? Now let's pull on another thread of this trap: personalization. Smart minds don't just notice errors, they interpret them as personal attacks. Someone disagrees, you feel insulted. Someone forgets something important, you take it as a sign you don't matter. But the world isn't thinking about you as often as you think. The Stoics trained every day to separate intent from impact. Does this action truly aim at me, or am I adding meaning where none exists? Research shows 80% of the stress we feel comes from assumptions stacked on top of neutral events. Later in this video, we'll explore a Stoic mental reframe used by Navy SEALs to instantly neutralize emotional reactions. Let's pull on another thread of this trap: emotional forecasting. Smart minds don't just notice errors, they interpret them as personal attacks. Someone disagrees, you feel insulted. Someone forgets something important, you take it as a sign you don't matter. But the world isn't thinking about you as often as you think. The Stoics trained every day to separate intent from impact. Does this action truly aim at me, or am I adding meaning where none exists? Research shows 80% of the stress we feel comes from assumptions stacked on top of neutral events. Later, I'll show you a Stoic question that instantly reveals when you're forecasting instead of communicating. But there's a darker corner to this trap: intellectual superiority. When you're used to being right, being wrong feels like a threat. So you debate, defend, rationalize. But winning arguments costs connection. The Stoics valued persuasion through example, not dominance. Think about Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome, arguably the most powerful man alive. Yet he listened more than he spoke. He wrote, "If someone can show me I'm mistaken, I'll gladly change, for truth is my aim." Imagine how different your relationships would feel if correction meant growth, not humiliation. And here's where the trap tightens. Smart people also fall into the trap of emotional forecasting, believing they can predict how others will react. You think you know how your partner will respond, so you avoid the conversation. You assume a friend will feel offended, so you bury the truth. Over time, this creates emotional landmines in your relationships. Epictetus warned, "Events are non-threatening. It is our interpretation that wounds us." The illusion of emotional prediction creates silence, distance, and resentment. Later, I'll show you a Stoic question that instantly reveals when you're forecasting instead of communicating. But there's a darker corner to this trap: mind-reading bias, believing that if someone cared, they would automatically know what you need. This belief sabotages friendships, workplaces, even marriages. The Stoics trained themselves to speak truths gently, but directly. They believed unspoken needs rot like fruit on the shelf. Speak early, speak clearly, speak kindly. We're only scratching the surface. Ahead lies another mental trap, even more invisible, one that targets smart people's deepest strength and transforms it into weakness. It erodes self-worth, sabotages discipline, and quietly destroys mental resilience. Most people live their entire lives without noticing it, but you're about to.
There's a strange paradox that almost no one talks about. The smarter someone is, the more likely they are to become addicted to progress instead of process. On the surface, it sounds inspiring, always improving, always evolving. But hidden beneath that ambition is the third mental trap: achievement dependency. Smart people often tie their value to output, results, trophies, grades, metrics. And because their minds are so capable, they get used to winning early. But when life inevitably throws a challenge they can't immediately solve, something dangerous happens. Their identity cracks. They panic. They feel like imposters. The Stoics warned that when your self-worth depends on outcomes, suffering becomes inevitable. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Your worth is measured by your soul, not external things." Later in this video, I'll share the Stoic reframe that detaches identity from results, unlocking a deeper, unshakable confidence. Picture a gifted student named Amina. Growing up, everything came easily: grades, praise, opportunities. Her intelligence was a constant applause. But when she reached university, surrounded by others just as bright, she wasn't automatically the best anymore. Suddenly, she felt average. Her motivation collapsed. Why? Because her self-concept was built on winning, not working. Achievement dependency had hollowed her resilience. The same pattern shows up in careers, relationships, fitness, business. When the applause stops, so does the person. The Stoics trained to love the effort itself. They didn't chase outcomes, they chased excellence. Imagine how unstoppable you'd become if setbacks fueled you instead of defining you. Now, let's open another loop. Achievement dependency doesn't just weaken resilience, it feeds perfectionism. Smart people assume their potential obligates them to perfection. Mistakes aren't just errors, they feel like identity fractures. This leads to procrastination, avoidance, and burnout. Seneca warned, "He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." When your standard is flawlessness, you never begin, you never finish, you freeze. Later, I'll reveal a Stoic ritual that turns perfectionism into consistent momentum, a tool elite performers swear by. But the trap goes deeper. Smart minds crave novelty, new skills, new ideas, new strategies, so they bounce from project to project, hobby to hobby, goal to goal, never mastering anything long enough to see results. It's intellectual dopamine. The Stoics would call it drifting. Epictetus compared this to being tossed by the waves of opportunity instead of commanding the helm. The illusion? It feels productive. The reality? It's sophisticated avoidance. There's power in boredom, repetition, routine. That's where mastery hides. Later in this video, we'll explore the Stoic discipline of constancy, a mindset that can turn scattered ambition into unstoppable progress. Let's open another loop hidden beneath the surface: comparison. Smart people often compare themselves against the peak performance of others, not the average. They look at someone's highlight reel and use it as a yardstick. But social media has turned comparison into a full-time sport. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time debating what a good man should be. Be one." The Stoics trained themselves to focus on their own lane. Comparison steals gratitude. It turns accomplishments invisible. Gratitude, paradoxically, fuels confidence and consistency. Later, you'll learn a Stoic gratitude exercise scientifically shown to increase productivity by 40% simply by shifting focus. And here's the darkest layer of this trap. Achievement dependency creates conditional self-love. You only feel proud when you perform. You withhold kindness from yourself unless you succeed. This builds internal pressure. Over time, the mind collapses under its own expectations. But Stoicism teaches unconditional discipline, not conditional praise. They valued virtue over victory, identity over accomplishment. The goal was to become a person of character, not just a person of credentials. Before we move on, hold this final twist. Smart people often confuse progress with motion. They research instead of act, plan instead of build, strategize instead of execute. It's productive procrastination. Psychologists call this precrastination, the illusion of progress that keeps you stuck. The Stoics believed clarity comes from action, not contemplation. Later, I'll reveal a 2-minute Stoic activation technique that forces momentum even when motivation dies. It's ridiculously simple and insanely effective. We're not done yet. Ahead is a mental trap that attacks emotional stability, sabotages discipline, and clouds judgment so subtly, most people stay blind to it for decades. But once you see it, you'll never think the same way again.
There's a silent storm that brews inside intelligent minds, an emotional pattern so subtle it goes unnoticed for years. It's called rumination, the fourth mental trap. Smart people don't just think, they rethink, replay, reanalyze. Their memory is sharper, their awareness deeper, their imagination stronger. Combine those three, and the past becomes a prison. Rumination is like mental quicksand. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink. Something goes wrong, and instead of extracting the lesson, you replay the details on loop. The Stoics considered this one of the most dangerous habits of the mind. Marcus Aurelius warned, "The longer you dwell on what is outside your control, the more control you surrender." Rumination steals presence, peace, productivity. Later in this video, I'll share the exact Stoic technique used to break rumination in under 60 seconds. Picture this. Omar makes a mistake at work, a simple oversight, a normal human error. But instead of moving on, his mind replays the moment all night. He imagines what others think. He rewrites conversations. He catastrophizes outcomes. By morning, nothing external has changed, but internally, he's exhausted. Rumination creates suffering without movement. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Modern psychology agrees 80% of thoughts in rumination are negative, repetitive, and unproductive. The Stoics trained to focus only on what advances virtue. Everything else? Distraction, noise. Later, I'll reveal the spotlight shift, a Stoic drill that snaps the mind back into the present. But rumination doesn't just trap you in the past, it hijacks the future through catastrophizing. Intelligent minds generate realistic disaster scenarios so convincingly they feel predictive. Your brain becomes a Hollywood scriptwriter for worst-case outcomes. The Stoics practiced premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity, not to scare themselves, but to build resilience. They visualized what could go wrong calmly without attachment, and then rehearsed the response. Modern research proves this reduces anxiety by preparing the nervous system for uncertainty. You'll learn how to do this later in a way that transforms fear into readiness. Now, here's a twist inside this trap. Rumination often confuses with reflection. Reflection learns. Rumination loops. Reflection ends. Rumination continues. Reflection gives clarity. Rumination clouds judgment. How do you tell the difference? Simple. Reflection asks, "What now?" Rumination asks, "Why me?" When your inner narrative becomes personal, emotional, or self-punishing, you have crossed into rumination territory. The Stoics never asked, "Why me?" They asked, "How will I respond?" That single shift turns helplessness into power. But the trap deepens. Rumination feeds emotional resistance. When you can't stop replaying something, you begin resisting reality itself. This shouldn't have happened. They shouldn't have said that. Life shouldn't be this way. Resistance multiplies suffering. Acceptance dissolves it. Epictetus reminded us we are disturbed not by events, but by our judgments about them. Stoicism isn't passive,
it's clarity. You accept what happened to access your power to change what happens next. Later, I'll teach you a Stoic sentence that instantly dissolves resistance and reclaims emotional authority. Let's open another loop. Rumination can come disguised as responsibility. Smart people feel responsible for every outcome, every mistake, every emotion in the room. They replay moments thinking they can rewrite them. But that's ego masquerading as duty. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The past is beyond prayer. What remains is yours to shape." Responsibility ends where action ends. Holding on to what you can't change is self-inflicted suffering. This is why Stoics practiced the control dichotomy, a filter for attention that protects mental energy. You'll learn that filter soon. And finally, here's the darkest part of this trap. Rumination trains your brain to trust fear over reason. The body gets addicted to adrenaline, cortisol, hypervigilance. Over time, peace feels foreign, calm feels unsafe. The nervous system expects chaos. Stoics rebalance this by cultivating stillness daily. Conscious breathing, silent observation, journaling. Stillness isn't the absence of thought, it's the mastery of thought. Imagine how powerful you'd become if you could silence mental storms on command. We're not done. Ahead lies a mental trap even more cunning, one that camouflages itself as kindness, empathy, and generosity. But behind its mask is burnout, exhaustion, and resentment. Smart, compassionate people fall into it constantly, and it's time you finally saw it for what it is.
There's a mental trap that disguises itself as virtue, so subtle, so socially rewarded that most people never question it. Smart, empathetic minds fall into it easily because they see nuances others miss. It's called over-responsibility for others' emotions. At first glance, it looks like kindness. You anticipate others' needs, you soften your words, you carry their discomfort. But slowly, quietly, your boundaries erode, your energy drains. You begin to feel responsible for how others think, feel, react, interpret, even suffer. The Stoics warned that empathy without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Epictetus taught that each person owns their own judgments, their own interpretations, and their own suffering. But smart people often assume they can fix emotional chaos in others, like emotional engineers. Later in this video, I'll reveal a Stoic boundary phrase that protects your energy without sacrificing compassion. Imagine Sarah. She's always the peacemaker. Friends vent to her, family expects her. At work, she absorbs extra responsibilities because no one else will do it right. She feels guilty saying no. She's praised for being reliable. But inside, she's exhausted. Her life becomes a reaction to other people's needs. Seneca wrote, "If you do not know to which port you sail, no wind is favorable." Sarah lost sight of her own direction. Her empathy turned into obligation. This is the hidden danger. When you consistently prioritize others' comfort, you slowly lose yourself. Later, you'll discover a Stoic recentering exercise that realigns your emotional compass. Now, here's the twist. Smart people are highly attuned to emotional microsignals. A tone shift, a look, a silence. They notice everything. Their brain fills in the blanks with assumptions. They sense discomfort and instinctively try to repair it. But this mental pattern creates emotional dependency. When others subconsciously realize you'll fix their problems, they stop trying. Responsibility shifts unfairly. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do not carry what another is fashioned to bear." Compassion becomes enablement. Support becomes caretaking. And caretaking breeds resentment. The open loop here, soon you'll learn how to support others without carrying them. Another layer, smart people romanticize martyrdom. Sacrificing your time, rest, boundaries. Society praises it. You feel useful. But usefulness is not worthiness. The Stoics believed worth came from character, not compliance. When you equate love with sacrifice, you teach others that your needs are optional, but your energy is finite. Burnout isn't just exhaustion, it's emotional bankruptcy. Research shows that chronic people-pleasing increases anxiety, depression, and sleep disruption. The Stoics countered this with sympathia, a universal belonging that honors individual responsibility.
Later, I'll share how to practice sympathia in a modern world that constantly demands your emotional labor. Let's go deeper. Over-responsibility creates a dangerous psychological illusion called emotional causality. You start believing that if someone is upset, you caused it. If someone fails, you should have prevented it. But this is ego wearing empathy's clothing. It assumes you control outcomes you never could. Epictetus taught radical clarity. Some things are up to us and others are not. Your feelings, actions, and reactions are yours. That's all. The moment you carry someone else's emotional weather, you surrender your sovereignty. Later, I'll give you a mental dichotomy that instantly reveals what's yours and what isn't. Now, here's the twist inside the trap. People who overextend emotionally often neglect internal boundaries. They say yes while their heart says no. Marcus Aurelius journaled daily to audit his intentions. Am I doing this from virtue or from vanity? Smart people confuse being needed with being loved. But dependency is not affection. Real love honors boundaries. It invites responsibility. Without it, relationships become unbalanced. Giver and taker, listener and venter, fixer and dependent. And when balance breaks, so does respect. Finally, the most dangerous corner of this trap, suppressing your needs to maintain peace creates internal war. Unspoken resentment accumulates like emotional debt. One day, it explodes, or implodes. Either way, authenticity fades. The Stoics valued apatheia, not coldness, but emotional clarity. It's the ability to care without collapsing, to love without losing yourself. Imagine how powerful you'd be if you could support others while protecting your inner equilibrium. We're not finished. Ahead lies a mental trap even more invisible, one that weaponizes intelligence against itself, fueling imposter syndrome, self-sabotage, and identity confusion. Most people never escape it, but you will once you see the pattern.
There's a hidden trap that thrives in intelligent minds, a quiet parasite feeding on potential, whispering doubt even in moments of success. It's called identity overextension. Smart people don't just do things, they become them. If they're good at school, they become the smart one. If they excel at work, they become the productive one. But here's the danger. When one identity becomes your entire personality, any threat to that identity feels like death. Fail a test, your whole self collapses. Get rejected, you question your worth. The Stoics warned urgently against this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do not define yourself by a single action. You are a citizen of the universe." Identity should be broad, flexible, resilient, not fragile. Later, you'll learn the Stoic identity structure that prevents emotional collapse when life shifts unexpectedly. Consider Hamza, the office genius. Anytime someone needed an answer, they came to him. He loved the validation. But one day, a newcomer outperformed him. Suddenly, Hamza felt invisible. His identity, built on being the smartest, shattered. This crisis isn't rare. It haunts athletes, students, entrepreneurs, even parents. When your value is tied to a role, change becomes existential. The Stoics countered this with role fluidity, seeing yourself as adaptable, multifaceted. You are not your job, not your achievements, not your labels. You are the pilot of your character. And the open loop here? Soon, you'll learn how Stoics built identity around virtue, not validation, an antidote to imposter syndrome. Let's dig deeper. Smart minds love labels. Introvert, overthinker, high achiever. Labels feel comforting because they simplify complexity. But the brain begins to behave according to the label, not reality. Psychologists call this self-stereotyping. You start acting like the character you believe you are, even if it's harmful. Epictetus warned against becoming a slave to roles. When identity becomes costume, authenticity suffocates. Later, I'll reveal a Stoic journaling question powerful enough to dismantle limiting labels
permanently. Here's the twist. Smart people often seek identity through comparison. Smarter than him, more disciplined than her. It's social ranking, a form of ego measurement. But comparison identity collapses when someone surpasses you. It's fragile. Stoicism teaches internal scorekeeping. Did you act with wisdom? Did you show discipline? Did you practice self-control? These metrics are unshakable. External identity fluctuates. Internal identity compounds. You'll learn how to shift from external to internal scorekeeping later, with a technique that rewires competitiveness into self-mastery. There's another subtle layer: conditional authenticity. Smart people often hide parts of themselves depending on the audience. Intellectual around smart peers, funny around friends, agreeable around authority. This creates identity fragmentation. Seneca warned that wearing too many masks leads us to forget our original face. Authenticity requires consistency, but consistency requires courage. The Stoics practiced inner citadel building, an unbreakable core identity based on personal virtue, not social perception. When you cultivate this, rooms stop changing you, you change rooms. Now, open this loop. Identity overextension fuels imposter syndrome. Because if your identity rests on being exceptional, anything normal feels like failure. Smart people dread being average, but average moments are inevitable. The Stoics reframed this. Nothing natural is shameful. Excellence isn't constant output. It's consistent intention. Later, I'll share the Stoic mantra that dissolves imposter syndrome at its root by separating performance from personhood. And finally, the darkest corner of this trap: identity addiction. When the praise stops, withdrawal begins. You chase attention, validation, labels. Success becomes a drug. Failure becomes identity death. But listen closely. Marcus Aurelius wrote his Meditations not to show his greatness, but to remind himself he was human, fallible, imperfect. Stoicism anchors identity in character, not applause. When you build identity from the inside out, nothing external can break you. We're not done. Ahead lies another mental trap that quietly sabotages discipline, consistency, and long-term growth. It's invisible because it disguises itself as logic, caution, and reason. But behind the mask, it's pure fear. Once you see it, you'll understand why so many smart people stay stuck, even when they know exactly what to do.
Here's a mental trap so deceptive that highly intelligent people mistake it for wisdom: rational avoidance. On the surface, it looks logical, measured, reasonable. But beneath that intellectual camouflage lies fear dressed in academic clothing. Smart people are exceptionally good at building convincing arguments, not just for ideas, but for inaction. They can justify why now isn't the right time, why more research is needed, why conditions must improve first. They create sophisticated excuses so elegant the mind applauds itself for avoiding risk. The Stoics saw this clearly. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more from imagination than from reality." Rational avoidance is fear wearing the mask of logic. But later in this video, you'll learn the Stoic action bias, a psychological lever that crushes avoidance and creates unstoppable momentum. Imagine a person named Daniel. He dreams of launching a business, writing a book, starting a YouTube channel. He studies, plans, learns. Every day he gathers information. But months pass, then years. His mind whispers, just a little more preparation. But preparation becomes procrastination in disguise. Meanwhile, someone with half his intelligence takes one messy step and succeeds. Why? Because progress rewards movement, not perfection. Stoicism teaches that action clarifies what thinking cannot. Marcus Aurelius instructed himself daily, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." Later, you'll hear a Stoic activation question that turns hesitation into forward motion instantly. But rational avoidance goes deeper. Smart people fear the opportunity cost of choosing wrong. They see every path, every variable, every possible consequence. Their intelligence becomes a burden of options. Too many choices create paralysis. Psychologists call this analysis fatigue. The Stoics neutralize this through dichotomy of control. Ask, is this within my control? If the answer is yes, act. If no, release. Simple, powerful. Later, I'll teach you how to implement this in 12 seconds, removing hesitation from decision-making instantly. Now, consider another twist. Smart people rationalize avoidance by intellectualizing fear. I'm not ready. I'm optimizing. The timing isn't right. But beneath the surface lives emotional avoidance, fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of exposure. Stoicism doesn't shame fear, it trains through it. Epictetus said, "How long will you delay before you demand the best of yourself?" Mastery doesn't arrive, it is built through friction, and friction requires presence in discomfort. Later, you'll discover the Stoic exposure drill that trains your nervous system to feel fear without obeying it. Here's where this trap becomes dangerous. Rational avoidance cripples discipline. You start waiting to feel motivated before acting. Smart people love motivation. They study it, curate it, analyze it. But motivation is unreliable. Stoics replaced motivation with discipline through identity. I act because it is my nature to act. That framing builds consistency even when emotion fades. Modern studies show that disciplined people simply start before they feel ready. Action generates clarity. Clarity generates progress. Progress generates motivation, not the other way around. And now open this loop. Rational avoidance also fuels defense through knowledge. You consume more books, podcasts, tutorials, not because you'll use them, but because learning feels safe. It's productivity cosplay. The Stoics practiced philosophical minimalism. Learn little, apply much. Knowledge without action is mental obesity. Later, you'll learn how to implement the Stoic 1-to-3 rule. 1 concept studied, 3 actions executed to eliminate intellectual hoarding. But the darkest layer of this trap is this. Rational avoidance erodes self-trust. Every avoided action sends a signal to your subconscious, we cannot handle discomfort. Over time, you become a prisoner of your own ability to reason. But Stoicism rebuilds self-trust through micro-action, consistent, measurable steps taken daily regardless of mood. Marcus Aurelius journaled to remind himself the obstacle is the way, not around, through. Imagine how your life would change if you stopped letting logic disguise fear. If you learned to act despite uncertainty. If hesitation became a trigger for movement. That's how Stoics lived. That's how warriors think. We're not finished. Ahead is a mental trap that quietly poisons emotional resilience, fuels insecurity, and hijacks self-worth. It's the reason smart people often feel lost, even when they're successful. Seeing it clearly is like turning on a light in a dark room.
There's a mental trap so quietly destructive that even the most self-aware people rarely notice it operating in the background. Identity fusion. This is when you merge who you are with what you do, what you believe, and what others think of you. Smart people fall into this trap more often because they build their ego around intellect, achievement, opinions, and expertise. On the surface, it looks like confidence, but underneath, fragile self-worth tied to external validation. When your identity fuses with outcomes, failure becomes personal. Criticism becomes an attack on your existence.
The Stoics warned against this centuries ago. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You are a soul carrying a corpse," meaning your essence is deeper than achievements, titles, or reputation. Later in this video, you'll learn a Stoic identity separation ritual that instantly protects your emotional state from external hits. Let's paint a story. Meet Faraz. He's the smart friend, the one people praise for knowing everything. Over time, Faraz's identity becomes fused with his image of being the intelligent one. So what happens? He stops asking questions. He avoids situations where he's not the best. He fears looking incompetent. Growth becomes threatening, not because the world changed, because his identity did. When identity fuses with intellect, curiosity dies. Ego replaces humility, but the Stoics valued ignorance as fuel. Epictetus said, "It is impossible to learn what you think you already know." Later, you'll hear a Stoic question that kills ego and resurrects curiosity. Identity fusion also warps emotional resilience. A person who is their job collapses when fired. A person who is their relationship breaks when love ends. A person who is their success shatters when they lose. Stoics separated roles from essence. You play roles, you are not defined by them. That separation creates psychological armor. Modern psychology calls this self-concept differentiation. High performers keep their identity flexible. That's why they recover faster. Later, I'll show you a Stoic exercise that prevents emotional collapse during transitions. But here's the hidden venom. When you fuse identity with achievements, you become addicted to external praise. Praise feels like oxygen. Criticism feels like suffocation. That's why smart people fear judgment. They're not defending their ideas, they're defending their identity. Stoicism calls this emotional slavery. Aurelius trained himself to be praised and insulted with the same face. Emotional neutrality. When you no longer want applause, you no longer fear boos. Later, you'll learn how to internalize this neutrality to become immune to opinions. Identity fusion also breeds imposter syndrome. When your identity is built on external perception rather than internal truth, the mind constantly whispers, "They don't know the real me." That anxiety is not proof of inadequacy, it's proof of identity misalignment. Stoicism fixes this by building identity from values, not outcomes. Values are within your control, outcomes are not. That's why Stoics sleep peacefully. They measure themselves by effort, not applause. Here's the darkest layer. Identity fusion destroys experimentation. When failure equals shame, you stop trying new things. But mastery requires failure. Creativity requires embarrassment. Growth requires looking foolish. Smart people avoid these experiences to protect image and stagnate as a result. The Stoics protected their identity from ego by practicing voluntary discomfort, putting themselves in situations where image didn't matter. Later, you'll learn how to practice this without risking reputation. And consider this, identity fusion creates loneliness. When you build identity on performance, people admire you for what you do, not who you are. You become a brand, a persona, a mask. Stoicism strips masks. It invites you back to your core, virtue, discipline, presence. And when you live from that space, relationships deepen, not because of status, but sincerity. Finally, imagine how your life would shift if failure no longer damaged identity, if criticism passed through you like smoke, if success didn't inflate ego. That is the Stoic identity, unshakable, centered, grounded. It's not about becoming less emotional, it's about placing your identity where the world cannot reach it. Because next, we confront a trap so psychologically corrosive that it quietly rewires self-worth, ruins relationships, and sabotages ambition. It's the invisible prison intelligent minds accidentally build around themselves, and most never escape it.
There is a mental trap so subtle, most intelligent people mistake it for realism. Catastrophic forecasting. It's the tendency to imagine the worst possible outcome as the most likely one. Smart minds fall victim because they're skilled at projecting possibilities. Unfortunately, anxiety hijacks that ability. Suddenly, an awkward text becomes, "They hate me." A difficult task becomes, "I'm going to fail." A small mistake becomes, "This will ruin everything." The Stoics warned, it's not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them. Modern cognitive psychology agrees. Catastrophic thinking activates the amygdala, flooding the body with cortisol, destroying creativity and confidence. But here's the twist. Many smart people proudly label themselves just realistic, unaware they're suffocating potential under imagined disasters. Later in this video, you'll learn a Stoic visualization that instantly dissolves worst-case panic and restores logic. Let me tell you about Sana, a brilliant student vividly haunted by outcomes that haven't happened. One day before exams, her mind whispers, "If you fail, everyone will think you're stupid." The thought spirals. She imagines disappointment, shame, future rejection. Her heartbeat rises, her focus collapses. Ironically, the fear of failing increases the likelihood of failing. That's catastrophic forecasting. Your imagined disaster becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The Stoics practiced premeditatio malorum, thinking about what could go wrong, not to panic, but to prepare. They anticipated hardship calmly, separating planning from panic. You'll learn how to do the same soon. Here's the secret structure of catastrophic thinking. It starts with uncertainty. The brain fills the gap with danger. Emotion hijacks logic, and you react to a future that doesn't exist. Smart people are vulnerable because they see more possibilities, more branches where things could break. But possibility isn't probability. Stoicism trains you to ask, is it within my control? If yes, act. If no, release. This question instantly cuts the roots of fear. Later, you'll learn how to install this reflex permanently. Catastrophic forecasting also damages relationships. One delayed reply becomes rejection. One quiet moment becomes anger. One misunderstanding becomes abandonment. Suddenly, you're arguing with a version of reality that lives only in your head. The Stoics warned, assumptions are emotional phantoms. To fight them is to punch smoke. Marcus Aurelius practiced a simple habit. Assume noble intent first. It saved his peace, and it can save yours. Soon, you'll learn a modern version of this mindset that prevents emotional misfires. Here's the paradox. Catastrophic thinkers believe worrying protects them. If I imagine the worst, I won't be surprised. But chronic fear sharpens awareness at the cost of joy. Life becomes survival mode. The body doesn't know the danger isn't real, so it reacts as if it is. Elevated heart rate, tight muscles, shallow breath. Over time, this rewires the nervous system toward constant threat. Stoicism resets that pattern by reinforcing internal safety. I can handle whatever comes. When the mind believes you can handle outcomes, it stops inventing monsters. Later, you'll learn a Stoic mantra that triggers this safety state instantly. And here's something darker. Catastrophic thinking kills opportunity. Every risk becomes danger. Every chance becomes threat. Every dream becomes a trap. The future becomes a hallway of knives. So, you freeze. Smart people stagnate because their imagination terrifies them more than reality ever could. Stoicism teaches you to fear regret more than discomfort. Courage over comfort. Without this shift, potential becomes prison. Consider this psychological truth. 85% of what we fear never happens, and the remaining 15% is often less severe than imagined. But catastrophic minds rehearse pain that will never come. The Stoics saw this as the greatest tragedy, suffering twice, once in imagination, once in reality. They trained to suffer only when necessary. Now imagine a life where your default reaction to uncertainty is not panic, but preparation. Where fear becomes data, not destiny. Where the unknown becomes your ally. That's the Stoic state, grounded, calm, ready. Because next, we expose a trap so deceptively noble that destroys productivity, relationships, and self-worth while disguising itself as virtue. Most intelligent people wear it like a badge, while it quietly sabotages their lives. There's a mental trap that looks virtuous on the surface, but corrodes your life from the inside. The savior complex, the compulsion to fix, rescue, and carry everyone else's problems. Smart people fall into it easily because they can see solutions others miss. It feels noble, it feels helpful, but slowly it becomes identity-driven. You start measuring your worth by how much you can solve for others. The Stoics warned against this disguised ego. Epictetus taught, "You cannot be the guide of others unless you first guide yourself." Helping becomes harmful when it's fueled by guilt, not choice, by compulsion, not clarity. And the world quietly encourages it. Society praises self-sacrifice, applauds overfunctioning, rewards burnout. Later in this video, you'll learn a Stoic boundary ritual that protects your peace without making you cold. Meet Ellie, brilliant, empathetic, everyone's go-to problem solver. At first, helping others feels fulfilling, but soon texts pour in at midnight. Crises multiply. People don't grow because they've outsourced growth to him. Ellie becomes tired, resentful, invisible in his own life. And here's the dark twist. The more he solves, the more problems appear. Psychological research calls this dependency reinforcement. When you rescue someone repeatedly, you teach them helplessness. They lose confidence. You lose boundaries. Stoicism forbids this, not out of coldness, but out of wisdom. Never deprive someone the chance to struggle, because struggle is the forge of strength. Soon, you'll hear a Stoic sentence that instantly frees you from guilt. The savior complex also masks fear. Fear of being disliked, fear of being irrelevant, fear of saying no. Smart people use helpfulness as social armor. But when love must be earned through fixing, it isn't love, it's conditional approval. Aurelius wrote, "Do not waste what remains of your life in the minds of others." When you rescue to be valued, you hand strangers the keys to your self-worth. Later, you'll learn a Stoic reframe that separates kindness from servitude. But here's the venomous layer. Constantly fixing others prevents you from fixing yourself. Your goals stay paused while you patch holes in everyone else's ship. That's how decades disappear. Smart people drown in collective problems and neglect their own potential. The Stoics were ruthless about prioritizing the inner citadel, your mind, habits, and virtue. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and you cannot build on a cracked foundation. In a moment, I'll show you how to apply healthy Stoic detachment without losing compassion. This trap also damages relationships. When you're the savior, relationships become unbalanced. You become the parent, they become the child. Gratitude fades, entitlement rises, and when you finally set boundaries, you become selfish. The Stoics would call this misalignment. Virtue cannot survive codependency. Healthy relationships require space to struggle. Fire needs air. People need discomfort. Growth demands friction. Soon you'll hear a Stoic sentence that instantly frees you from guilt. And there's also the identity illusion. Saviors believe that without them, everything will collapse. But that belief is ego in disguise. The universe spun billions of years without you, and will continue the same after you. Your responsibility is not the entire world. It's your controllable sphere. Marcus Aurelius practiced a mental separation, not mine. When encountering problems outside his influence, he mentally released them. You'll learn this technique soon. Now imagine if you reclaimed the energy wasted rescuing others. Where would you be 6 months from now? A year? With reclaimed time, boundaries, and focus, your life transforms. And ironically, when you grow yourself, you help others more through example than intervention. Because Stoics don't preach strength, they embody it. Next, we'll explore a mental trap that silently corrupts ambition, warps motivation, and steals joy from the moments you're supposed to enjoy the most.
It's the invisible pressure that convinces smart people they're always behind, even when they're winning.
There's a mental trap slowly devouring the modern mind, amplified by social media, competition, and society's obsession with speed. Timeline anxiety, the belief that you're supposed to have everything figured out by now. Smart people suffer more because expectations are higher. Every birthday feels like a deadline. Every friend's achievement feels like evidence that you're behind. The Stoics warned against comparing journeys. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Timeline anxiety isn't triggered by reality, it's triggered by comparison, and comparison is the death of peace. Later in this video, you'll learn a Stoic journaling question that instantly neutralizes timeline pressure. Picture this: Zara, brilliant, ambitious, but relentlessly anxious. She scrolls through social media and sees engagement photos, job promotions, travel reels, success stories. Her brain turns these curated highlights into standards she must meet. She doesn't see the arguments, the debt, the loneliness behind those posts. She only sees perfection, and slowly, her confidence decays. Timeline anxiety whispers, "You're late, you're behind, everyone's moving except you." But the Stoics remind us, no two paths are identical. Later, you'll learn a mind trick used by Aurelius to break free from comparison forever. Here's the psychological root. Humans inherited a tribal brain. If everyone moves ahead and you don't, evolution screams danger, abandonment, decreased resources, survival risk. But in the modern world, your tribe is 8 billion people. Comparing to all of them is insanity. Smart people forget this and suffocate under imaginary timelines. Stoicism combats this with internal metrics. Judge yourself by virtue and effort, not age, timing, or what others have. That shift changes everything. Timeline anxiety also creates false urgency. You rush decisions. You settle for relationships out of fear of being alone too long. You take jobs you don't love to appear responsible. The Stoics called this hasty action, movement without clarity. Seneca warned that rushing is worse than delay because you waste more time correcting bad choices than pausing to choose well. Soon, you'll learn how to set a Stoic tempo for life, slow enough to think, fast enough to grow. And here's the cost. Timeline anxiety kills gratitude. When you're obsessed with where you should be, you can't appreciate where you are. The present becomes a stepping stone, never a destination. Happiness becomes contingent on the next milestone. You climb and climb, but joy stays out of reach. The Stoics anchored happiness in control. Not when, but how. Not where, but who you're becoming. Later, you'll hear a Stoic affirmation that pulls you back into presence instantly. Let's expose a myth. Society tells you that success has an expiration date. Graduate by 22, career by 25, marriage by 28, house by 30. But reality is messier and more beautiful. Morgan Freeman became famous at 52. Colonel Sanders franchised KFC at 65. Vera Wang started designing dresses at 40. Stoicism rejects arbitrary timelines. It asks one question: what is up to me? The moment you answer that honestly, anxiety dissolves. Timeline anxiety also inflates envy. When someone gets what you want before you do, jealousy spikes, not because they have it, but because you believe you're late. The Stoics practiced sympathia, celebrating others without diminishing yourself. Imagine the peace of seeing someone else win and feeling no scarcity. That's Stoic abundance, and you're closer to it than you think. But here's the darkest layer. Timeline anxiety makes you sabotage success. When you feel behind, you rush into opportunities you're not prepared for. Then you fail, reinforcing the belief that you're inadequate. It becomes a loop. The Stoics break this loop with amor fati. Love your pace, love your process, love your path. Confidence doesn't come from being early. It comes from being aligned. Now, imagine waking up tomorrow with zero comparison, zero deadlines, zero societal pressure.
just intention, consistency, and growth at your natural rhythm. How different would you feel? Calm, powerful, focused? Because life isn't a race unless you make it one. And next, we reveal a mental trap that poisons decisions, paralyzes creativity, and tricks smart minds into thinking they're being responsible while they're quietly suffocating their own potential. There's a mental trap so sneaky that intelligent people proudly believe it's a strength. Overanalysis paralysis. When thinking replaces doing, and clarity becomes confusion because the mind won't stop generating possibilities. The smarter the brain, the worse it becomes. You can analyze outcomes from every angle, predict consequences, forecast variables, and then never act. The Stoics warned, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. Overanalysis turns neutral decisions into emotional burdens. It inflates risk, magnifies uncertainty, and drains momentum. Later in this video, you'll learn a Stoic decision threshold that guarantees forward movement without recklessness. Imagine Hamza, brilliant strategist. He can explain every nuance of a decision, the benefits, the risks, the hidden factors, the potential downsides. Impressive, right? But months pass, opportunities expire, competitors move, momentum dies, because Hamza is always almost ready. Overanalysis makes you feel productive without producing anything. One of the Stoics' greatest lessons: action reveals truth, thought only reveals possibilities. A moment from now, you'll hear a Stoic action rule that destroys hesitation. Here's the psychological mechanism. Humans evolved to avoid pain. The brain treats uncertainty like danger. Thinking becomes a safety blanket. Smart people misuse intelligence to protect themselves from emotional discomfort. They seek the perfect moment, not realizing perfection is delay dressed in logic. Modern research shows that decisions made with 70% clarity outperform decisions delayed until 90%. Why? Because action provides feedback. Delay provides anxiety. Later, you'll learn how to install a 70% rule into your life instantly. Overanalysis also destroys creativity. When you evaluate ideas faster than you explore them, you kill innovation in the crib. The Stoics embraced experimentation. They valued iteration over contemplation. Aurelius would write decisions down, then act, trusting virtue to guide the outcome. He didn't drown in hypotheticals. He moved. Action refined wisdom. Smart people must learn clarity comes from engagement, not isolation. The danger grows deeper. Overanalysis paralyzes ambition through what psychologists call decision fatigue. Each choice drains mental energy. When you think excessively before acting, you exhaust willpower, leaving nothing for execution. This is why many intelligent people are exhausted but unproductive. The mind is overclocked. The life is underlived. The Stoic remedy? Simplify choices, amplify action. Later, you'll learn a 3-question Stoic filter that eliminates 80% of unnecessary mental workload. And here's the emotional venom. Overanalysis creates regret before anything even happens. You imagine failure so vividly that the brain treats it as real pain. Then you retreat, not because failure occurred, but because you felt it. That's self-sabotage through imagination. Epictetus warned, men are distressed not by things, but by the view which they take of them. Your mind plays both attacker and victim. Soon, you'll learn how to silence this internal attacker. Overanalysis poisons relationships too. You interpret texts, tone, timing, tiny details, turning harmless interactions into emotional puzzles. You assume intent from thin air. You solve problems that don't exist. Stoicism teaches, take things at face value unless proven otherwise.
Otherwise, you imagine shadows and fight ghosts. That's emotional exhaustion at scale. The darkest layer. Overanalysis creates a false identity of wisdom. Because thinking feels smart. It feels deep. But wisdom lives in outcome, not imagination. Stoicism is practical philosophy. Its worth is measured not in thought, but transformation. The world rewards execution, not contemplation. Smart people forget this and slowly fade behind thinkers who dare to act imperfectly. Consider a different life. A life where decisions feel lighter, where you gather data, commit, adjust, and learn, where action becomes habit, not event. The Stoics called this prohairesis, the disciplined will to act with reason. When you master this, fear loses grip, because the antidote to overthinking isn't more thinking, it's movement. Now, prepare yourself, because next we confront a mental trap that disguises itself as kindness, but quietly destroys self-respect, ruins boundaries, and erodes identity. It's the silent parasite of the intelligent and empathetic, and escaping it might be the most important shift of your life.
There's a mental trap that drains confidence, erodes boundaries, and hijacks your identity. One that intelligent and empathetic people fall into almost automatically. Chronic people-pleasing. On the outside, it looks like kindness, helpfulness, flexibility. But underneath, it's fear. Fear of rejection, fear of disappointing others, fear of losing approval. The Stoics warned against seeking validation as a currency for self-worth. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinions than our own." Later in this video, you'll learn a Stoic mental reframe that instantly weakens the grip of external validation. Meet Hira. Everyone loves her because she never says no. She agrees to plans she doesn't enjoy, takes responsibilities she can't handle, laughs at jokes she doesn't find funny. She's exhausted, burned out, resentful, but still smiling. That's the silent tragedy of people-pleasing. You betray yourself to maintain harmony outside. The Stoics would call this internal discord, living against your nature. When actions don't match values, the soul becomes restless. Soon you'll learn how to align actions with authenticity without triggering guilt. Here's the psychology. People-pleasing is learned. As children, approval equals safety. You behave well, you're praised. You obey, you're loved. That pattern becomes identity. As adults, rejection feels like abandonment. So you adapt, bend, shrink. But Stoicism teaches autarkia, self-sufficiency. True peace comes from internal approval, not from applause. Later, you'll earn a Stoic mantra that strengthens internal validation. People-pleasing also creates emotional debt. The more you say yes to avoid conflict, the more resentment accumulates. Eventually, you explode, shocking everyone because you were always fine. But you weren't. You were silent, polite, and eroding slowly. The Stoics valued assertiveness, calm, clear boundaries rooted in reason, not anger. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors with locks. You choose what you allow. Here's the twist. Chronic pleasers mistake compliance for connection. But real connection cannot exist without authenticity. When people love the mask, the real you remains unloved, and loneliness grows. Stoicism pushes toward truth in action. When you show who you are, those meant for you will stay. Those who leave were never aligned. Aurelius would say, "The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape the ranks of the insane. You escape by being yourself." People-pleasing also sabotages ambition. Every time you prioritize someone else's comfort over your growth, you trade potential for approval. You postpone dreams to avoid disappointing others. You shrink opportunities to stay pleasant. The Stoics warn, comfort is a thief. Virtue requires tension. Growth requires friction. Later, you'll learn a Stoic discomfort practice that builds boundary muscle. And here's the darkest layer. People-pleasing destroys respect, silently. When you always agree, always comply, never push back, people subconsciously downgrade you. They trust you less with responsibility because you avoid conflict. They value your opinion less because you always adapt. Respect requires edges. Boundaries demand firmness. Stoicism teaches act from principle, not popularity. That's how respect is earned. People-pleasers also attract takers. When you give without limits, you become a magnet for those who take without conscience. Slowly, your circle becomes unbalanced, givers surrounded by black hole personalities. Stoicism recommends constant circle audits. If the energy exchange isn't mutual, withdraw your attention, not angrily, rationally. Now, imagine a life where you say no without guilt, choose your boundaries without fear, and lose relationships without losing peace, where your voice matters, not because you scream, but because you speak your truth calmly. That's the Stoic social state, grounded, respected, authentic. And it's closer than you realize. Because next, we reveal the final mental trap, a psychological parasite that attaches to intelligent, ambitious minds and silently keeps them from ever feeling enough, no matter how much they accomplish.
We've arrived at the final mental trap, one so deep, so quietly destructive that even the strongest, smartest minds rarely escape it. Perpetual inadequacy. It's the psychological virus that whispers, "You're not enough yet." No matter what you accomplish, grades, promotions, wealth, relationships, physique, the finish line moves. You achieve everything past you dreamed of, yet present you feels empty. That's because inadequacy isn't based on results. It's based on identity. The Stoics saw this centuries ago. Seneca wrote, "If you are not content with what you have, you will not be content with what you want." Achievement without internal acceptance becomes an endless treadmill. You run, sweat, burn, but never arrive. Later, you'll receive a Stoic ritual to permanently rewire your sense of enoughness. Picture Faizan. He wins awards, people praise him, friends envy him. But privately, he feels like he's behind. Why? Because he compares his weaknesses to others' strengths. He sees only the gap, never the gain. Stoicism dismantles this by shifting focus inward. Are you better than yesterday? That's the only valid comparison. Aurelius measured progress by virtue and discipline, not numbers, trophies, or applause. Soon you'll learn a Stoic weekly review that builds progress from self-mastery instead of performance. Psychology calls this trap hedonic adaptation. The brain normalizes every achievement quickly. That new milestone becomes baseline. Smart people are especially vulnerable because they set high targets. When you live in future possibility, reality feels dull. The Stoics anchored joy in process, not outcome. They taught the reward is in who you become, not what you collect. Perpetual inadequacy also warps ambition. You fear celebrating wins because you think celebration breeds laziness. But celebration is fuel. It reinforces identity. When you never feel enough, you burn discipline instead of enjoying growth. Eventually, you burn out, not from effort, but from emptiness. Stoicism teaches sustainable ambition. Advance steadily, rest deliberately, reflect deeply. Soon you'll learn the Stoic weekly review that builds progress from self-mastery instead of performance. Here's the darkest layer. Perpetual inadequacy becomes self-image. You don't just feel like you're not enough, you believe it. Identity shapes behavior. If you believe you're inadequate, you'll sabotage opportunities, shrink in rooms, lower your voice, delay your goals, and dim your brilliance. Epictetus warned, "What you imagine yourself to be,
that you are. Identity creates destiny. The Stoics reversed this by choosing identity consciously, disciplined, resilient, principled. And the tragedy? People around you see greatness, but you only see missing pieces. You forget you're living inside a version of life your past self prayed for. Timeline anxiety, comparison, perfectionism, they blind you to progress. Stoicism clears the fog with presence. Ask yourself, what do I already have that I once wished for? That question collapses inadequacy into gratitude. Now, imagine life without this trap. You wake up grounded, grateful, focused. You pursue goals because they align with your values, not because you're chasing worth. Wins feel satisfying. Losses feel instructional. People's opinions become echoes, not commands. That is the Stoic destination: emotional independence. And so, you've just learned 10 mental traps, the invisible architecture of anxiety, procrastination, insecurity, overwhelm, burnout, and emotional slavery. And you've discovered Stoic interventions, practical, timeless tools you can apply today. But there's one final truth the Stoics left us with. Knowledge without action is wasted. You know the traps, you know the antidotes. Now choose to apply them. Speak your truth, set your boundaries, act before you're ready, focus on what you control, celebrate your pace, and most importantly, remember, you are already enough, becoming more. Because the person you become from this point forward will either be forged by these traps or freed by these principles. Choose freedom.